teachers, how do you get your students to confess to things they did behind your back? I was in the bathroom when I saw Mr. Johnson is hot with hearts around it. Mr. Johnson was the 25-year-old substitute. Completely inappropriate. I took a photo and marched to my classroom where my fifth period was chatting. I slammed the door. The principal just called me. My voice was deadly quiet. He knows what one of you did. You have exactly 5 minutes to confess or everyone gets suspended. Shelby, the valedictorian, dropped her hydro flask. What? Connor, the star quarterback, jerked back. Everyone? Arya, the theater kid, went pale. What did he find out? 4 minutes, I said, staring at the clock. One of you did something. The principal has evidence. Confess now or everyone pays. The room exploded. Shelby shot up. Wait, Mrs. Johnson, if this is about the tests, I can explain. Yes, I've been selling my old tests but only to help people study. It's basically tutoring. Everyone stared at her. You what? Connor said. Shut up, Connor, you literally pay Brad to write your essays. Shelby snapped. What the hell, Shelby? Brad roared. Connor went red. That's different. That's just homework help. $50 is basically tutoring fees. You haven't written a single essay all year, Brad yelled. I even took your SAT. You took his SAT? I screeched. Kevin tilted his head. So that's how Connor got into honors. 3 minutes, I said coldly. Arya stood up dramatically. If this is about the visitor logs, Mike Peterson is 18. It's completely legal. The PE teacher? Jenna gasped. The senior. The student. We've been signing him in as my tutor to make out in the library, but he's 18 and I'm 17, and that's totally legal. That's why the library's always closed, someone muttered. 2 minutes, I shouted. Jenna burst into tears. I took the money, the student council funds, $5,000. I put it in crypto and lost it all. I've been faking fundraisers to cover it. Pete shot up. Wait, if we're all confessing, the gambling ring is mine. I run bets on every game. But I pay taxes. My dad's an accountant, we file it. A gambling ring? Shelby shrieked. You're selling tests, Pete shot back. Brianna, the quiet girl, suddenly stood. I've been flirting with the substitute. The room went silent. Mr. Johnson? I asked weakly. We matched on Hinge. He doesn't know I'm a student. I used old photos. That's catfishing, Arya yelled. You're forging documents, Brianna yelled back. 1 minute, I roared. Kevin pulled out his phone. This needs to be documented. He looked around. So we have test stealing, essay fraud, SAT fraud, forgery, embezzlement, illegal gambling, and catfishing a teacher. Anyone else? Oscar raised his hand. I've been growing the devil's lettuce in the greenhouse. Oscar! Everyone screamed. Kat stood up. I hacked the grade system, Josh confessed. I've been living in the ceiling. The ceiling? I shrieked. My parents think I'm at boarding school. I just come here. Time's up, I shouted. Nobody confessed to what the principal knows about. Shelby sobbed. What else could there be? One of you, I said slowly, wrote something inappropriate about a staff member in the bathroom. That's it? Connor screamed. I admitted to academic fraud over graffiti? Who wrote that Mr. Johnson is hot? I demanded. Brianna went white. Someone knows about my texts. The door opened. Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor, walked in with his mop bucket. Miss R. Johnson, about that writing in the bathroom? I'll paint over it tomorrow. I stared. You saw who did it? Yeah, me. He shrugged. Dave, Mr. Johnson, great guy. Helped me with my marriage yesterday. Wife was ready to leave me. He listened for an hour, gave me advice, saved my marriage. I wrote it as a thank you. Hot means cool, right? Like good person? The room went silent. The principal hadn't called. I'd made that up. And now I knew about 8 different criminal operations in my honors class because the janitor didn't understand slang. Kevin, opening a fresh bag of chips, looked around at the chaos. Definitely better than YouTube. Crunch, crunch. So the principal doesn't actually know anything? No, I whispered. But you do now, Kevin added cheerfully. No, I whispered. But your parents do now. Everyone froze. I held up my phone. I texted them everything while you were confessing. The classroom door handle started turning. The door flew open and Shelby's mother stormed in first. She was a lawyer, I knew that. Always wore sharp suits to parent conferences. Her eyes locked on Shelby sobbing at her desk, and her face went hard. She marched straight to me and her voice cut through the classroom noise like a knife. Why is my daughter crying about selling tests? 3 more parents pushed through behind her and the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Connor's father arrived next. Tall guy in an expensive polo shirt. Already looking annoyed like this was interrupting his golf game. Brad's parents came in together, both wearing work clothes like they'd left their jobs mid-shift. More parents kept arriving and my classroom was getting crowded fast. Students were trying to explain their confessions all at once, and parents were shouting questions over each other, and I just stood there frozen watching my bluff destroy everything. Shelby was sobbing harder now trying to explain the test selling to her mother. Connor was backing away from his father who kept demanding to know what academic fraud meant. Brad was pale and quiet while his parents stared at him like they'd never seen him before. The noise level was insane. Parents yelling, students crying, everyone talking over everyone else. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Just watched the chaos spread like I'd set off a bomb in my own classroom. More parents pushed through the door and there wasn't enough space for everyone. Pete's dad arrived looking confused. Oscar's mom was crying before she even reached her son. Kat's parents both showed up and their faces were pure shock and anger mixed together. My phone kept buzzing with more parent responses to my mass text. They were all coming. Every single one. I'd texted all of them everything their kids confessed, and now they were flooding my classroom demanding answers I couldn't give. Principal Hayes appeared in the doorway with the school resource officer right behind him. Hayes was mid-50s, usually calm and collected, but his face went completely white when he saw the packed classroom full of angry parents and sobbing students. He stood there for 3 seconds just staring, and I watched him process what was happening. The resource officer, a big guy named Gonzalez who usually just walked the halls looking bored, suddenly looked very alert and serious. Hayes pushed through the crowd toward me and grabbed my arm. He pulled me toward the hallway and his grip was tight enough to hurt. We got outside the classroom and he shut the door behind us, muffling the chaos inside. The hallway was empty and quiet, and Hayes turned to me with this expression I'd never seen before. His voice came out low and controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "What evidence do you actually have?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. He repeated the question, slower this time, and I knew I had to tell him. "The principal never called me," I whispered. His face somehow went even whiter. "I made it up. I saw bathroom graffiti about Mr. Johnson, and I thought a student wrote it, and I made up the story about you having evidence to get them to confess." Hayes just stared at me. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He put his hand against the wall like he needed support. "You lied about me having evidence." His voice was flat. "Dead." "Yes. And they all confessed to actual crimes because of your lie." "Yes." He looked like he might throw up or pass out or both. Hayes closed his eyes and took 3 deep breaths. When he opened them, he looked about 10 years older. "We can't handle this in a classroom. Everyone to the auditorium. Now." He opened the door, and the noise hit us again like a physical wave. Hayes raised his voice, loud and commanding in a way I'd never heard before. "Everyone move to the auditorium immediately. This is not optional." Parents started arguing, but Hayes cut them off. "Auditorium. Now. We need space and we need order, and we're not getting either in this classroom." The resource officer started directing people toward the door. Parents were still shouting questions. Students were still crying. The crowd slowly started moving, and I followed behind, feeling like I was walking to my own execution. The hallway filled with angry parents and scared students, and I kept my eyes on the floor. We filed into the auditorium, and it felt surreal, like a nightmare version of a school assembly. Parents and students scattered across the seats. Hayes went up on the stage and gestured for me to stand beside him. I felt like I was on trial. The auditorium was maybe half full, but it felt packed because of all the noise. Everyone was talking at once. Hayes tried to call for quiet, but nobody was listening. Kevin sat in the back row by himself. He had another bag of chips. I could hear the crunching even from the stage. He pulled out his phone and started filming again. His face was completely calm, almost interested, like he was watching a really good show instead of witnessing multiple lives fall apart. A couple other students noticed him filming, and nobody even tried to stop him. Hayes finally got most people quiet enough to speak. Parents were demanding explanations. Students were crying and panicking about whether their confessions would be used against them. Shelby's mother stood up, and her lawyer voice carried across the whole auditorium. "I'm declaring right now that all of these confessions are inadmissible. They were obtained through deception and coercion by a teacher who lied about having evidence." Other parents jumped on that immediately. Connor's father stood up, nodding hard. "Exactly. These kids were manipulated. False confessions. My son was coerced." Brad's mother shot him a look that could melt steel. "Your son paid mine to commit fraud." But other parents were agreeing with Shelby's mother, insisting their kids had been tricked into confessing to things that maybe weren't even true, even though everyone in that room knew the confessions were completely real. The resource officer stood up from his seat in the front row. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "I need to speak with Jenna, Pete, Kat, and Oscar. Now." Those 4 students went even paler than they already were. The officer explained in this official voice that he was legally required to report the embezzlement, gambling operation, grade hacking, and marijuana growing to local police regardless of how the confessions were obtained. Jenna started crying harder. Pete looked sick. Kat just stared straight ahead like she'd shut down completely. Oscar's mother let out this awful sound, half sob, half gasp. The officer gestured for those 4 to follow him, and they stood up on shaky legs. Parents were protesting, but the officer was firm. "These are criminal matters. I have no choice." He led them out a side door, and the auditorium erupted in fresh chaos. Brad's parents stood up together and turned to face Connor's family 3 rows behind them. Brad's father's voice was shaking with anger. "Your son pressured mine into committing SAT fraud. Paid him to take a test. That's a crime." Connor's father stood up fast, all defensive. "Kids helping kids. That's all it was." Brad agreed to it. Nobody forced him. Brad's mother's voice went cold. "He's 17. Your son is 18. Your son paid our minor child to commit fraud so he could get into college he doesn't deserve." Other parents were turning to watch. Connor's father tried to wave it off. Boys being boys. Helping each other out. It's basically tutoring. That made Brad's father lose it. "Tutoring? He took the SAT for your kid. That's not tutoring. That's fraud." Brad was sinking lower in his seat, looking like he wanted to disappear. Connor was red-faced and staring at the floor. The 2 families were shouting at each other across the rows, and Hayes was trying to restore order, but nobody was listening to him. Hayes finally got everyone quiet enough for me to speak. My voice came out small and scared. I explained the whole thing. The bathroom graffiti saying Mr. Johnson was hot. My assumption that a student wrote something inappropriate. My split-second decision to bluff about having evidence. The 5-minute countdown. The confession cascade. Parents were staring at me with expressions ranging from fury to disbelief. Then Mr. Rodriguez stood up in the back. He raised his hand timidly like a student asking permission to speak. Hayes gestured at him, looking confused about why the janitor was even here. Rodriguez's voice was quiet and apologetic. I wrote it. The bathroom message, about Mr. Johnson. The auditorium went silent. Dave, Mr. Johnson. He helped me with my marriage. My wife was leaving me. He listened for an hour, gave me advice. Saved my marriage. I wrote that he was hot to say thank you. I thought hot meant good person. Like cool means good. Complete silence. You could have heard a pin drop. I didn't know it meant attractive. I'm 62. I don't know the slang. Hayes closed his eyes and I watched his jaw clench. He dismissed Rodriguez with barely controlled frustration, and the janitor shuffled out looking mortified. The whole thing was absurd. Completely absurd. A janitor's generational slang confusion had triggered this entire crisis. Multiple criminal investigations, destroyed futures, ruined careers, all because a 62-year-old man didn't know that hot meant attractive instead of good. I saw a few parents trying not to laugh despite their anger. The situation was so ridiculous it was almost funny, except it wasn't funny at all because I'd just destroyed my career and multiple students' futures over a misunderstanding. Hayes looked like he was fighting the urge to scream or cry or both. The auditorium stayed quiet for about 10 seconds, and then the chaos started building again. A woman I didn't recognize stood up near the front. Ivy Calloway, I realized. PTA president. Her daughter wasn't even in my class, but she was here anyway. Her voice was loud and righteous. I demand Miss Johnson's immediate suspension. She used deceptive interrogation tactics on minors. She lied about evidence. She manipulated these children into confessions. Other parents started nodding and agreeing. More voices joined in calling for my suspension. Hayes tried to calm everyone down, but the calls were getting louder. I stood there on the stage realizing I was about to become the villain in this story. I'd tried to address what I thought was inappropriate student behavior, and instead I'd become the bad guy. The teacher who destroyed kids' lives with a bluff. The one who couldn't handle a simple discipline issue without creating a disaster. Ivy Calloway was still talking, getting more parents on her side, demanding accountability and consequences. I watched my teaching career crumble in real time while Kevin sat in the back row, still eating chips, still filming, completely unfazed by any of it. Principal Hayes stepped up to the microphone and the auditorium went quiet. He looked exhausted and angry and done with all of this. His voice was flat when he spoke. I was suspended with pay effective immediately pending a full district investigation. I needed to surrender my classroom keys and building access card and leave campus right now. The words hit me like actual physical blows. My teaching career was over. 8 years of work destroyed because I couldn't handle a simple bathroom graffiti situation without creating a disaster. Hayes gestured for me to approach the stage and I walked up on shaking legs while every parent in the auditorium watched. I fumbled with my key ring trying to get the classroom key off, but my hands wouldn't work properly. Hayes took the entire ring from me along with my ID badge. He told me the district would contact me about next steps. His tone was cold and professional, like I was a stranger instead of someone he'd worked with for years. I walked down the auditorium center aisle toward the exit and it felt like the longest walk of my life. Parents stared at me with expressions ranging from anger to pity to satisfaction. Near the back I saw Shelby sitting with her mother, and our eyes met for just a second. Her face had this weird expression I couldn't read. Maybe she was grateful the attention had shifted away from her confession and onto my methods. Maybe she felt guilty that her test-selling admission had started this whole cascade. Or maybe she was just scared about her own future. I looked away and kept walking. The auditorium doors closed behind me, and suddenly I was alone in the empty hallway. The building felt different already, like I didn't belong here anymore. I walked to the parking lot and got in my car and just sat there for a minute trying to process what had just happened. My phone started buzzing with texts, but I couldn't look at them yet. I drove home in a daze, barely paying attention to the road. At home, I collapsed on my couch and finally looked at my phone. 37 unread messages. Teacher group chats were exploding with the story. Someone had already posted about it on the community Facebook page. Parents were commenting with their opinions about whether I should be fired or supported. The school gossip network had turned me into the main character in the worst possible way. I scrolled through message after message, watching my professional reputation get destroyed in real time. Former students were weighing in. Current students were sharing their versions of what happened. Everyone had an opinion about my methods and my judgment and my fitness to teach. My phone rang and I saw it was my principal calling. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, I listened to the message. Hayes sounded tired and stressed. The district superintendent wanted to meet with me tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. He gave me the address of the district office downtown. His tone made it clear this wasn't optional. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the auditorium full of angry parents, and Hayes taking my keys, and Shelby's unreadable expression. I kept checking my phone, watching the story spread further and further. Local news had picked it up. The headline read, "Teacher's Bluff Backfires," and I became a cautionary tale about classroom management gone completely wrong. The next morning, I drove to the district office building feeling like I was going to throw up. The superintendent's secretary directed me to a conference room where Haley Porter was already waiting. She did not look happy to see me. Haley was in her 50s with gray hair pulled back tight and a reputation for being absolutely no nonsense about liability issues. She gestured for me to sit and didn't waste time with pleasantries. She was furious about the exposure the district was getting. The media attention was bad enough, but several parents were already threatening lawsuits. She pulled out a folder with printed screenshots of social media posts and news articles. My face was in half of them. She said regardless of my intentions, I had used deceptive interrogation tactics that were typically reserved for law enforcement. I had lied to minors about evidence. I had created a coercive environment that resulted in confessions. Any one of those things was problematic, but all three together was a legal nightmare for the district. I tried to explain about the bathroom graffiti and my split-second decision, but she cut me off. My reasoning didn't matter at this point. The damage was done, and now the district had to manage the fallout. Haley opened another folder, and her expression got even more serious. The district attorney was reviewing whether any of the student confessions could be used in criminal proceedings given how they were obtained. The students who had admitted to actual crimes might have a legal defense because of my deceptive methods. She let that sink in for a minute. I had been trying to catch a graffiti writer, and instead I might have accidentally given real criminals a way to avoid consequences. The irony was so absurd I almost laughed, except nothing about this was funny. Jenna had embezzled $5,000. Pete ran an illegal gambling operation. Kat hacked the grade system. Oscar was growing drugs in the school greenhouse. All of them had confessed to serious violations, and now their lawyers might argue the confessions were coerced and inadmissible. Haley said the district attorney would make that determination, but either way the school still had to address the violations through internal disciplinary processes. The legal mess was just beginning, and I was at the center of all of it. I spent the next week at home while the investigation proceeded. I wasn't allowed on campus or allowed to contact any students. I watched from a distance as the story took on a life of its own. Local news ran segments about proper interrogation methods and student rights. Education blogs picked it up as an example of what not to do. Teacher forums debated whether I deserved to lose my job or whether the students' own actions were the real problem. I became a cautionary tale used in discussions about classroom management and professional boundaries. My name was attached to phrases like gone wrong and major mistake and career-ending decision. I tried not to read the comments, but I couldn't help myself. Some people defended me, saying I was trying to maintain discipline in an impossible situation. Others called me manipulative and said I had no business working with children. The truth was probably somewhere in the middle. But nuance didn't matter when you were the subject of internet debate. Then Kevin posted his video. He had edited together the confession sequence with his deadpan narration, calling it better than YouTube. The school administration tried to contain it, but the video spread through private servers and group chats faster than they could track. Students were sharing it, teachers were watching it, parents were forwarding it to each other. Kevin's commentary actually made some people laugh at the absurdity of the whole situation. The janitor's slang confusion, the cascade of increasingly serious confessions. My face when I realized what I had done. Kevin had captured all of it, and now it was entertainment for everyone who wasn't living through the consequences. I found nothing funny about ruining my career and multiple students' lives, but apparently plenty of other people did. The video got thousands of views before the school finally managed to get most copies taken down. The damage was already done, though. Now there was permanent documentation of my worst professional moment. The school board held an emergency meeting to address the crisis, and I was required to attend. The meeting room was packed with community members who wanted to watch my fate get decided publicly. Ivy Calloway stood up first and spoke for 10 minutes about my deceptive tactics and the trauma I had caused students. She demanded my immediate termination and said the district needed to send a message that this behavior was unacceptable. Other parents joined her argument, building momentum for my firing. Then a smaller group spoke up, defending me. They said I had been trying to maintain classroom discipline in a difficult situation. They pointed out that the students had actually committed serious violations, and my methods didn't change that fact. They argued I had been an excellent teacher for 8 years and deserved consideration for one mistake. The board members listened to both sides with carefully neutral expressions. I sat in the front row feeling like I was on trial. In a way, I guess I was. Travis McKinney, the board attorney, stood up to explain the legal complexity. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for being extremely thorough. He said my deception was clearly wrong and violated professional conduct standards. However, the students had genuinely committed serious violations that couldn't simply be ignored because of how the confessions were obtained. The school had obligations to address academic fraud and embezzlement and drug operations regardless of my flawed methods. The legal situation was messy because my actions and the students' actions were separate issues that had gotten tangled together. The board couldn't just fire me and pretend the student violations didn't happen. They also couldn't ignore my misconduct just because the students were guilty of worse things. Travis recommended extending my suspension while the district determined appropriate consequences for both me and the students. The board voted unanimously to accept his recommendation. I would stay suspended with pay while they figured out what to do with everyone involved in this mess. Meanwhile, the students were facing their own consequences. Jenna's embezzlement confession triggered a full audit of student council finances. The auditors confirmed the money was genuinely gone. $5,000 lost to bad crypto investments and failed attempts to cover the losses with fake fundraisers. Jenna's parents were middle class and devastated. They couldn't easily repay that amount. They set up payment plans, and Jenna got a part-time job to contribute. But the district was also considering criminal charges. Jenna was 17, which meant she could potentially be charged as an adult for the theft. Her future hung in the balance while lawyers debated whether prosecution was appropriate given her age and the circumstances of her confession. Her parents hired a lawyer who argued the confession was coerced, but prosecutors said the missing money was evidence enough regardless of how they learned about it. Pete's gambling operation investigation revealed something nobody expected. He had actually paid taxes on his betting income. His accountant father had helped him file proper forms and report the gambling revenue. Somehow this made the whole situation more absurd. Pete had shown more financial responsibility than most adults while running an illegal betting ring at the school. His father hired a lawyer who actually tried to use this as a defense, arguing Pete demonstrated remarkable maturity and business sense. The argument didn't prevent Pete's suspension from the school, but it did make some people laugh at the weirdness of a teenage bookie being more financially responsible than the teacher who exposed him. Pete faced consequences, but his organized approach to crime somehow made him less sympathetic as a victim of my methods. Kat's situation went nuclear faster than anyone expected. The district expelled her within 48 hours of discovering the grade hacking, because tampering with the computer system violated every academic integrity policy in the handbook. Her parents showed up to the emergency hearing looking destroyed. Both of them taught at another school across town, and they understood exactly what their daughter had done and what it meant. Kat sat between them staring at her hands while the board explained she was removed from the school permanently. The prestigious university that had accepted her rescinded the admission offer the same day. Kat's mother cried silently through the whole meeting, and her father kept trying to explain that Kat was a good kid who made a terrible mistake, but nobody wanted to hear it. The grade hacking was too serious and too deliberate to excuse. I watched from the back of the room feeling sick, because Kat had confessed trying to protect herself from whatever she thought the principal knew about, and now her entire future was gone. 3 days into my suspension, Mr. Rodriguez showed up at my apartment door holding a bunch of grocery store flowers wrapped in plastic. He looked miserable and kept apologizing in English and Spanish for causing this whole disaster with his bathroom message about Mr. Johnson. I invited him in because leaving him in the hallway felt cruel, and he sat on my couch clutching the flowers, explaining again how he thought hot meant good person, and he just wanted to thank Dave for the marriage advice. His wife had been ready to leave him, and Mr. Johnson spent an hour listening and helping, and Mr. Rodriguez wanted to show appreciation the only way he knew how. I ended up comforting him even though I was the one whose career was destroyed. He kept saying it was his fault for not understanding slang, and I kept saying it was my fault for making up the principal story and lying to my students. We sat there for 20 minutes, both taking blame for a situation that spiraled out of control because of a generational language gap. His genuine remorse about the confusion was somehow the kindest interaction I had experienced in weeks. Everyone else was angry or disappointed or threatening lawsuits, but Mr. Rodriguez just felt terrible about his innocent mistake causing so much pain. He left the flowers on my coffee table and promised to pray for me, and I watched him walk back to his car thinking that the janitor who started everything understood consequences better than most of the people involved. Shelby's test-selling operation turned out to be way more extensive than her initial confession suggested. The school investigation found records going back 2 full years, showing she had made over $3,000 selling old tests to desperate students. She kept detailed spreadsheets tracking which tests she sold to whom and how much she charged, and the organization was actually impressive in a disturbing way. Her mother, the lawyer, immediately went into damage control mode, trying to frame the whole thing as entrepreneurial tutoring rather than academic fraud. She argued Shelby was helping students study by providing practice materials, and the money was compensation for Shelby's time organizing study resources. The school board was not buying it. They stripped Shelby of her valedictorian status and notified the colleges she had applied to about the academic integrity violation. Several scholarship offers disappeared within days. Shelby lost her full ride to a prestigious private university and ended up with only 2 acceptance letters from schools willing to overlook the cheating scandal. I heard through other teachers that Shelby seemed almost relieved to lose the valedictorian title, like the pressure of being perfect had been crushing her for years. Her mother fought the consequences hard, but Shelby herself seemed ready to accept them and move forward without the weight of maintaining her spotless academic record through dishonest methods. Brad faced serious consequences for writing essays and taking Connor's SAT, but his parents successfully argued he was exploited by wealthier students who could afford to pay him. The contrast in how their families could afford legal representation created obvious inequities in the outcomes. Connor's family hired an expensive lawyer who tried to minimize everything as teenage mistakes, while Brad's parents could barely afford a consultation with a public defender. The school board ended up treating Brad more leniently because his parents presented evidence that he needed the money for his family and felt pressured by popular athletes who threatened to make his life difficult if he refused to help them cheat. Brad got suspended for 6 weeks and lost his position on the debate team, but avoided expulsion. Connor faced harsher consequences despite his family's legal resources because the evidence of him paying for academic fraud was overwhelming. The inequity bothered me even as I faced my own crisis. Brad and Connor committed the same violations, but their families' financial situations determined how severely they were punished. I watched the board meetings and saw how money bought better arguments and more sympathetic presentations. Brad's family talked about economic hardship, while Connor's family talked about protecting their son's future, and the difference in resources was painfully obvious. Connor's athletic scholarship offers evaporated when universities learned about the academic fraud. Every school that had recruited him for football received notification about the SAT cheating and essay fraud, and within 2 weeks, all 5 scholarship offers were withdrawn. His father tried using business connections to minimize the consequences by calling alumni at various universities and arguing the violations were minor teenage mistakes that shouldn't destroy his son's athletic career. The attempts backfired publicly when one university athletic director got tired of the pressure calls and released a statement explaining they could not accept students who committed academic fraud, regardless of their athletic ability or their father's business relationships. The statement did not name Connor specifically, but everyone in town knew who it was about. Local news picked up the story, and suddenly Connor's father's attempts to protect his son became a story about entitled parents trying to buy their way out of consequences. I watched the entitled quarterback face real accountability for the first time in his life, and felt small satisfaction, even though I knew I was not supposed to feel that way. Connor had spent years getting special treatment because he was good at throwing a football, and now he was learning that actions had consequences that even athletic talent could not erase. His father's public failure to manipulate the system somehow made the whole situation feel more fair. Arya and Mike Peterson's situation resolved most easily out of all the confessions. Since they were both legally adults and their relationship was consensual, no criminal charges applied. The school investigated the forged visitor logs and confirmed Arya had been signing Mike in as her tutor, so they could make out in the library, but the relationship itself was not illegal. Arya got suspended for 2 weeks for forging documents and misusing school facilities, but Mike faced no consequences at all. He was a student doing nothing wrong by dating another student who happened to be signing him into the building inappropriately. The arbitrary nature of some school rules became obvious when Arya got punished for paperwork violations, while Mike walked away clean, despite being equally involved in everything. The guidance office sent them both letters about appropriate use of school spaces, and that was basically it. Their dramatic confession during my bluff turned out to be the least serious violation in the room. Josh's living in the ceiling situation triggered the most unexpected response from all the confessions. Social services got involved immediately when they learned his parents thought he was attending boarding school, while he was actually sleeping in the school ceiling and showering in the gym. The school resource officer filed a mandatory report, and within days, social workers were investigating Josh's home situation. Turns out Josh had been hiding from an abusive home environment for months. His parents were not sending him to boarding school. They were barely aware of where he was most of the time, and Josh had created an elaborate story about a scholarship program to explain his absence. The social workers found evidence of neglect and emotional abuse, and Josh got removed from his home within a week. He was placed with a foster family across town and continued attending school, but now he had an actual bed and regular meals and adults who checked on him. The confession that seemed most bizarre during my bluff accidentally connected Josh with people who could actually help him escape a dangerous situation. The guidance counselor reached out to me privately during my suspension to explain what happened with Josh. She called my cell phone one evening and told me the full story about the abuse investigation and foster placement. She said Josh's confession might have saved his life by forcing intervention in a situation he was too scared to report himself. Living in the ceiling was terrifying for him, but felt safer than going home, and my accidental exposure of his secret got him real help. It was the first time I considered that maybe some good came from this disaster, even if my methods were completely wrong. The guidance counselor was not excusing my deceptive tactics, but she wanted me to know that at least one student ended up better off because of what happened. Josh was getting therapy and stable housing and regular meals, and he was not hiding in a ceiling anymore. I cried after that phone call because everything felt so complicated. I had destroyed my career and multiple students' futures with a stupid bluff, but I had also accidentally saved one kid from a horrible situation. The moral ambiguity of the whole mess was exhausting. 4 weeks into my suspension, the district investigation concluded with mixed findings. The investigator interviewed everyone involved and reviewed all the documentation, and came back with a nuanced report that acknowledged I violated professional conduct standards by using deceptive tactics, but found no evidence of malicious intent. The report stated I was attempting to address what I believed was student misconduct, and made a poor judgment call about appropriate methods. The recommendation was formal reprimand and mandatory ethics training rather than termination. I got the findings in an official letter that explained my personnel file would permanently reflect the violation, but I could return to teaching after completing a professional development program on appropriate disciplinary methods. The relief was overwhelming but also incomplete. I was not getting fired, but my reputation was permanently damaged, and I would always be the teacher who made that terrible mistake. The district superintendent called me personally to explain the decision, and emphasized that I was expected to rebuild trust through consistent professional behavior. She made it clear this was my one chance and any future violations would result in immediate termination. The school board meeting to decide my fate was packed with community members on both sides of the issue. I arrived 30 minutes early, and the auditorium was already filling up with parents and teachers and random community members who had opinions about my situation. Ivy Calloway sat in the front row with a group of parents holding signs demanding accountability and teacher standards. Her daughter was not even in my class, but she had made my case her personal crusade about protecting students from inappropriate teacher behavior. On the other side of the room, a smaller group of former students and parents held different signs supporting my 8 years of excellent teaching and arguing, "Everyone deserves a second chance after one mistake." I sat in the designated area for personnel matters feeling like I was on trial, while the board members took their seats and called the meeting to order. The room was loud with people talking and arguing, and I could hear Ivy organizing her group's presentation. A parent I recognized from years ago caught my eye and nodded supportively, and I felt tears starting, but forced them back because I could not cry in front of everyone. The board president banged his gavel calling for order and explaining the process for public comment, and I realized this was really happening. My entire career was about to be decided by a public vote, after community members argued about whether I deserved to keep teaching. The board president banged his gavel 3 times to quiet everyone down. He explained the public comment rules and said each speaker got 3 minutes. Ivy stood up first with her prepared statement about teacher accountability and professional standards. She talked for exactly 3 minutes about how my deceptive tactics violated trust and created liability for the district. Her speech was polished and practiced, and several board members nodded along. I sat there trying to look calm while my stomach twisted into knots. When Ivy finished, the board president asked if anyone else wanted to speak. I expected more parents to pile on with complaints. Instead, Shelby stood up from the back of the auditorium. My breath caught because I had no idea she was even there. She walked to the microphone looking nervous but determined. She cleared her throat and started talking about how she'd been cheating since freshman year. She said the test selling was just the latest thing, and she probably would have kept going if she hadn't gotten caught. Her voice shook when she admitted that the pressure to be valedictorian made her lose sight of actually learning anything. She told the board that facing consequences forced her to think about why she was cheating in the first place. Several board members leaned forward in their seats. Shelby said that losing her valedictorian status hurt, but it also freed her from the competition that was eating her alive. She looked directly at me and said I was the first teacher who actually held her accountable instead of looking the other way. Ivy's face went red and she tried to interrupt, but the board president told her to wait her turn. Shelby sat down and I felt tears starting but forced them back. Brad stood up next and walked to the microphone. He said getting caught was the best thing that happened to him because it freed him from writing essays for rich kids who treated him like a service. His voice got stronger as he explained how trapped he felt taking money to do Connor's work. He told the board that ending the essay scheme let him focus on his own education for the first time in 2 years. He said he was actually relieved when everything came out, even though he faced consequences too. A few board members exchanged glances and started whispering to each other. Brad thanked me for accidentally exposing a situation he didn't know how to escape on his own. Ivy stood up again and demanded to speak, but the board president said other people were still waiting. Kevin walked to the microphone eating chips from a small bag. Several people laughed and the board president asked him to put the food away. Kevin shrugged and stuffed the bag in his pocket. He said in his flat voice that my classroom was the only place students got held accountable all year. He explained that everyone knew about the cheating and gambling and hacking, but nobody cared until I accidentally exposed it. His observation that adults looked away from problems until they became public landed hard in the silent room. Kevin said the school had bigger issues than my bluff, and maybe people should think about why students felt comfortable running criminal operations for years. He sat down and pulled out his chips again. The board president looked uncomfortable and called for a short recess. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. The student speaking on my behalf was completely unexpected, and I didn't know what to think about it. Ivy cornered me outside the bathroom and said the students were just trying to avoid their own consequences. I told her they were facing plenty of consequences and walked away. The meeting resumed 20 minutes later, and the board president said they'd heard enough public comment. He asked the board attorney to summarize the investigation findings. The attorney explained that I violated professional conduct standards, but showed no malicious intent. He said the recommended consequence was formal reprimand and mandatory ethics training. The board voted with 5 members supporting the recommendation and 2 voting for termination. I would return to teaching after completing a professional development program on appropriate disciplinary methods. It wasn't the complete victory I wanted, but it wasn't getting fired either. The formal reprimand would stay on my permanent record forever. Superintendent Porter stood up and emphasized that this was my one chance, and any future violations meant immediate termination. The meeting ended and people filed out talking in small groups. Several parents I didn't know stopped to tell me they supported the decision. Ivy left without looking at me. I drove home in a daze trying to process everything that happened. The next few weeks brought news about student consequences that varied wildly based on family resources. Kat got expelled for grade hacking and lost her university admission. Her parents couldn't afford the lawyers that other families hired. Jenna faced criminal charges for embezzling student council funds, and her middle-class family struggled to repay $5,000. Connor got expelled too when his SAT fraud came out publicly, and all his scholarship offers disappeared. His father tried using business connections to minimize consequences, but it backfired and made everything worse. Other students got suspensions and probation depending on what they confessed to. The inequality in outcomes bothered me even though I knew the legal system worked that way. Pete's gambling operation shutdown led to suspension, but his accountant father's documentation of tax payments helped reduce his consequences. Oscar got mandatory drug counseling for the greenhouse marijuana and connected with mental health treatment he actually needed. Aria just got suspended for forging visitor logs since her relationship with Mike was technically legal. The different results showed how much family money and connections mattered in the justice system. Josh's situation turned out completely different from everyone else. Social services placed him with a foster family after learning his parents thought he was at boarding school. He got therapy and stable housing and regular meals instead of hiding in the ceiling. 6 weeks after the board meeting, I returned to the school to start teaching again. My first day back felt weird and awkward as I walked through the hallways. Teachers I'd worked with for years didn't know how to act around me. Some smiled and welcomed me back. Others avoided eye contact and hurried past. Students stared as I walked to my classroom. I knew the formal reprimand on my permanent record meant some people would always see me as the teacher who destroyed students' lives with a bluff. Principal Hayes stopped by my classroom before first period started. He asked how I was doing and said he was glad I was back. But something felt different in how he talked to me. He seemed supportive but also cautious, like he was worried about liability. Every time I mentioned a disciplinary decision, he tensed up slightly. The easy trust we had before was gone and replaced by careful professional distance. He left after a few minutes and I arranged papers on my desk, trying not to think about how everything had changed. My second week back, Shelby returned to the school after her suspension ended. She stopped by my classroom after school looking different somehow. She said losing valedictorian status actually relieved her even though it hurt at first. The pressure to maintain perfect grades and beat everyone else had been crushing her for years. Now she was learning material because she wanted to understand it instead of just gaming the system for points. She thanked me awkwardly and left. I sat at my desk thinking about how complicated everything was. Pete came by a few days later with his usual cocky attitude. He joked that shutting down his gambling operation created a void in the school's underground economy. He said he should have charged more since demand was so high. His ability to laugh about consequences suggested he'd land on his feet eventually, even with suspension on his record. I told him to focus on legitimate business activities, and he grinned and said he was already planning something new. Josh stopped by one afternoon looking healthier than I'd ever seen him. He thanked me for accidentally saving him by exposing that he lived in the ceiling. He said it was terrifying up there but felt safer than going home. My bluff connected him with people who actually helped him escape an abusive situation. He was doing well in foster care and planned to keep attending school. Talking to him made me cry after he left because at least one good thing came from my terrible mistake. Brianna's situation with Mr. Johnson got sorted out about 2 weeks after everything exploded. The substitute found out about the catfishing when someone showed him Brianna's dating profile. He came to the principal's office looking embarrassed and said he had no idea she was a student. The whole thing made him uncomfortable enough that he quit and took a job in another district an hour away. Brianna wrote me a letter a few days after he left. She apologized for lying about her age and said she knew it was wrong. She thanked me for forcing her to face her issues with honesty, even though my methods were messed up. Reading her letter made me feel weird because I still wasn't sure if I'd helped anyone or just ruined everything. The school board held meetings over the next month about new policies. They created specific rules about teacher interrogation methods and student privacy rights. Teachers couldn't make threats about evidence they didn't have. We had to follow proper procedures for disciplinary issues. Administration brought in lawyers to write official guidelines. Watching them create rules specifically to prevent future teachers from making my mistake felt both humbling and validating. My disaster became a case study in what not to do. The new policy manual even had a section referencing incidents where deceptive tactics led to unintended confessions. They didn't name me specifically, but everyone knew. 3 months after the initial crisis, I ran into Mr. Rodriguez in the school parking lot. He was loading his cleaning supplies into his truck. He saw me and immediately started apologizing again about the bathroom graffiti. He'd apologized probably 20 times already. I finally laughed about it with him. I told him his innocent compliment about Mr. Johnson being a good person created the most absurd crisis in the school history. He smiled and said his wife still thanks him for asking Mr. Johnson for marriage advice. We stood there in the parking lot talking about how one misunderstood word changed everything. He said he learned what hot really means to teenagers now. I said I learned to verify information before making threats. We both agreed the whole thing was ridiculous. Kevin graduated at semester break because he had enough credits. He stopped by my classroom on his last day. He handed me a flash drive and said it contained his full, unedited documentation of the confession day. He recorded everything on his phone, including all the confessions and parent arrivals. He said someday I might want to remember exactly what happened. His strange gift felt like closure on the weirdest chapter of my teaching career. I asked him why he documented everything. He shrugged and said it seemed important at the time. Then he left to go to college. I put the flash drive in my desk drawer and haven't looked at it yet. Connor's father tried to get me fired again in January. His son lost his final scholarship opportunity when a university found out about the SAT fraud. The father showed up at a board meeting demanding my termination. He said I destroyed his son's athletic future with my reckless teaching methods. The board dismissed his complaint after about 10 minutes. They said Connor's academic fraud caused his own problems. The entitled businessman failed to manipulate the system, and I felt satisfied watching it happen. Connor actually seemed relieved when his father's complaint got rejected. He told me later that losing football freed him from his father's crazy expectations. I started teaching a new semester in January with completely fresh students. Most of them knew me as that teacher from the confession thing. Some students seemed nervous around me on the first day. They probably worried I'd trick them into confessing stuff. Other students appreciated that I actually enforced rules. One kid said his older brother told him I was strict but fair. Slowly, I rebuilt my classroom reputation. The new students didn't know the full story. They just knew I had high standards and followed through on consequences. My teaching style stayed firm, but I never again made threats about evidence I didn't have. Jenna's family worked out a payment plan with the school to repay the embezzled student council funds. Her parents couldn't afford $5,000 all at once. Jenna got a part-time job at a restaurant to help contribute. She worked weekend shifts and gave half her paycheck to her parents for the repayment. Her criminal charges got reduced to restitution and community service. She came by my classroom one afternoon and said facing consequences taught her more about integrity than any lecture could have. She seemed different somehow, less entitled and more aware of how her actions affected other people. The guidance counselor and I developed an unexpected friendship based on managing the crisis aftermath together. She helped me process the guilt about my role in exposing the students. We met for coffee every few weeks and talked about the whole situation. She said my methods were definitely wrong, but some outcomes turned out positive. I slowly accepted that I'd made a huge mistake even though a few students actually benefited. She told me about Josh's progress in foster care and how he was doing well. Talking to her helped me understand the complicated nature of what happened. Not everything was black and white. Brad thrived after escaping Connor's exploitation. His grades improved dramatically when he actually did his own work. He discovered he was pretty smart when he wasn't spending all his time writing someone else's essays. He got accepted to a good state university on legitimate merit. His parents stopped by my classroom in March to thank me. They said I accidentally freed their son from a toxic arrangement. Brad had been too scared to refuse Connor's demands before everything got exposed. Now he was planning to study engineering and actually excited about college. Watching him succeed felt good. Aria channeled all the drama from her confession experience into a one-act play about teenage secrets and consequences. She wrote it for her theater class project. The play featured students confessing various things to a teacher who'd made a big mistake. It was actually quite good. She performed it at the Spring Arts Showcase. The audience laughed at some parts and got quiet during serious moments. Performing her own story seemed helpful for her. Other students learned about the complexity of the whole situation through her artistic version. After the show, she told me creating the play helped her process everything that happened. Oscar's mandatory drug counseling started 2 weeks after his confession. The school required him to attend sessions with a therapist as part of his consequences for the greenhouse operation. He showed up to my classroom one afternoon in March looking uncomfortable. He stood in the doorway fidgeting with his backpack straps and said the counselor diagnosed him with anxiety disorder. Turns out he'd been smoking to calm his racing thoughts and constant worry about school performance. The therapist connected him with proper medication and coping strategies that actually worked better than the plants ever did. He thanked me in his awkward Oscar way, saying getting caught forced him to get real help he didn't know he needed. I watched him leave and felt weird about accidentally helping someone through terrible methods. Spring semester brought strange perspective as I observed the confessing students moving forward in completely different ways. Some stayed bitter about their consequences and glared at me in hallways. Others seemed genuinely grateful for forced accountability and stopped by to update me on their progress. Most just wanted to graduate and escape the whole mess. I saw Shelby studying alone in the library instead of running her test-selling operation. Connor walked past the football field without the weight of his father's expectations crushing him. Jenna worked her restaurant job between classes to repay the embezzled money. Everyone processed their consequences differently, and I couldn't predict who would grow from the experience versus who would just resent me forever. Principal Hayes called me to his office one afternoon in April and closed the door. He looked tired and older than he had before the confession crisis. He admitted the whole situation exposed problems the administration ignored for years. The cheating, gambling, and other violations existed because nobody wanted to look too closely at the honors program. Parents donated money, students got into good colleges, and everyone pretended everything was fine. My bluff accidentally forced the school to confront issues they'd been avoiding. He said the district implemented new academic integrity policies and increased counseling resources because of what happened. His admission felt like strange validation, even though my methods were completely wrong. The district required me to attend mandatory ethics training in May, with teachers from across the area who made various professional mistakes. I sat in a conference room with 20 other educators who'd crossed lines in different ways. One teacher had an inappropriate relationship with a student. Another falsified grade records to help athletes stay eligible. Someone else used physical discipline that crossed into abuse. Hearing their stories helped me understand my error in context. I learned better classroom management strategies that didn't involve deceptive interrogation tactics. The instructor taught us about building trust while maintaining boundaries and enforcing rules through transparent processes instead of manipulation. I took pages of notes and actually felt like I was becoming a better teacher through facing my mistake. Shelby stopped by my classroom in early May with news about college acceptances. She got into a good state university despite losing valedictorian status. She told me her admission essay about learning integrity through consequences was apparently really compelling to the admissions committee. They liked that she took responsibility for her mistakes and showed genuine growth. She seemed excited about college as a fresh start where she could be a real student instead of a cheating competitor. Her eyes looked different somehow, less calculating and more open. She thanked me for holding her accountable even though my methods were messed up. Watching her leave, I felt the complicated mix of pride and guilt that defined my whole experience with the confession crisis. The school year ended in June with mixed feelings I couldn't fully sort out. I survived the crisis and kept my job, but my reputation changed permanently. Some parents requested their kids not be placed in my classes for next year. The guidance counselor showed me the requests, and I felt the sting of being seen as the teacher who tricks students. Other parents specifically requested me because they wanted someone who actually enforces accountability. One mother wrote a note saying she appreciated that I held her son to real standards, unlike other teachers who looked away from cheating. My principal told me my class assignments would be smaller next year to account for the parent concerns. I cleaned out my classroom for summer break, knowing I'd be teaching fewer students in a school where everyone knew my story. Summer break started, and I seriously considered leaving teaching entirely. I updated my resume and browsed job postings for corporate training positions and education consulting roles. My teaching degree qualified me for various non-classroom jobs that seemed safer and less complicated. But every time I got close to applying somewhere, I stopped and closed my laptop. I realized that despite everything, I still believed in education and student accountability. I wasn't ready to let one disaster end my career. Teaching mattered too much even when it was messy and painful. I needed to become better at it, not run away from it. I spent July and August volunteering with at-risk youth programs in the city. The community center served kids facing poverty, family instability, and violence in ways my suburban honors students never experienced. I helped with homework tutoring and mentoring sessions. These students dealt with consequences constantly, not because they got caught cheating, but because life was just harder for them. One kid told me about getting suspended for fighting, but he was actually defending his younger brother from bullies. Another girl struggled with grades because she worked nights to help her single mother pay rent. The perspective helped me understand that my confession crisis, while dramatic to me, was ultimately about privileged students facing consequences many kids deal with constantly. My honors class freaked out over academic fraud while these kids navigated actual survival challenges. Josh emailed me in mid-August from his foster home. The subject line said, "Thank you," and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. His message explained he was doing really well in his new placement with a family who actually cared about him. He attended summer school to catch up on credits he missed while living in the ceiling. He wrote that he wanted to become a teacher himself someday, because he saw how much teachers could impact students' lives. His message said I saved his life by accidentally exposing his living situation, even though I didn't mean to. Reading his words made me cry at my kitchen table. Josh forgave me for my flawed methods because the outcome helped him escape abuse. His email didn't erase my mistakes, but it helped me forgive myself a little bit. I returned to the school in late August for the new year with renewed commitment and better boundaries. My classroom setup looked the same, but I felt different inside. I wrote my rules clearly on the board with specific consequences listed for each violation. No more vague threats or manipulation tactics. My disciplinary methods would be transparent from day one. I practiced introducing myself to my smaller class sizes, explaining my expectations without the baggage of last year's disaster. I promised myself I would never again make threats about evidence I didn't actually have. The confession crisis taught me that shortcuts in discipline create bigger problems than they solve. I organized my lesson plans and took a deep breath before students arrived, ready to be the teacher I should have been all along. The first day of the new school year arrived, and I stood at my classroom door watching students file in for first period. Shelby walked past me, and our eyes met for a second before she looked away and found her seat. Connor wasn't there because he'd transferred to community college after losing his scholarships. Pete entered next and nodded at me without saying anything, and I nodded back. Brad came in talking to another student about summer vacation like nothing weird had ever happened between us. Arya walked in with her usual dramatic flair but seemed more subdued than last year. The awkwardness hung in the air for the first few minutes of class as I took attendance and everyone settled into their seats. I started my lesson on the syllabus and classroom expectations, and gradually the tension eased as we focused on actual schoolwork instead of the confession disaster. By the end of the period, students were asking normal questions about homework and due dates, and the weirdness faded into something manageable. Over the next few weeks, I developed an unspoken understanding with the students who'd confessed last year. They'd faced their consequences and moved forward. I'd faced mine and moved forward, and we were all trying to do better now. Nobody brought up the confession day directly, and I didn't reference it in class. We just focused on learning the material and getting through the year without more drama. 3 weeks into the semester, I received an email from Kevin with the subject line, "Update from college." I opened it during my planning period and smiled at his message. He wrote that he was studying computer science at State University and occasionally ran into former classmates around campus. Shelby was in his statistics class and seemed less stressed without the valedictorian pressure hanging over her. Brad was doing well in the honors program and actually writing his own essays now. Kevin's email ended with his usual sign-off that made me laugh out loud at my desk. He wrote that college was interesting, but honestly the confession day last year was still better content than most of what he encountered in his daily life. His detached observational style hadn't changed at all, and I appreciated that he kept me updated on how everyone was doing. I wrote back thanking him for the update and told him I was glad he found college interesting. Our inside joke about that absurd day had become a weird connection between us, and his occasional emails felt like checking in with a friend, rather than a former student. Pete showed up in my classroom after school one afternoon in October looking nervous. He asked if we could talk, and I gestured for him to sit down. He explained that he'd successfully appealed his suspension over the summer and was back at the school full-time. His gambling operation remained completely shut down, and he had no plans to restart it. But he'd joined the business club and was channeling his entrepreneurial energy into legitimate activities. He was organizing a school store selling spiritware and snacks, and he wanted my approval for the project since I was one of the teacher sponsors. I reviewed his business plan and was impressed by how thorough and professional it looked. His budget projections and marketing strategy showed real financial literacy. I approved the project and signed the paperwork he needed. Later that week, the business club's faculty sponsor stopped me in the hallway and joked that Pete was the most financially literate student in the school history, despite having a criminal record. And she said his gambling operation might have been illegal, but he clearly understood money better than most adults. I had to agree, and I was glad Pete found a legal outlet for his business skills. An email from Kat arrived in my inbox one evening in November. I almost deleted it thinking it was spam, but then I saw her name in the sender field. She wrote that she'd enrolled in community college after her expulsion and university admission loss. She was taking computer science classes and discovered she was really good at programming when she applied her skills legally. Her professors praised her natural talent for coding, and she was getting straight A grades. Kat's email apologized for hacking the grade system last year and thanked me for forcing her to confront her cheating before she made worse choices in college. She wrote that getting expelled was the worst thing that ever happened to her, but it also saved her from continuing down a path that would have led to bigger problems. She said she planned to transfer to a 4-year university after finishing her associate degree, and she wanted me to know that facing consequences taught her more about integrity than any lecture could have. I wrote back telling her I was proud of her progress and glad she found a legal way to use her computer skills. Her email made me feel a little better about my role in the whole confession disaster. I saw Connor at the grocery store one Saturday in December, and we had an awkward conversation in the cereal aisle. He told me he was attending community college and taking general education classes. Without football pressure, he discovered he actually enjoyed learning when nobody was forcing him to maintain certain grades for athletic eligibility. His father remained bitter about the lost scholarships and barely spoke to him anymore. But Connor seemed relieved to escape the athlete expectations and forge his own path. He said he might transfer to a 4-year school eventually, but he wasn't in a rush. He was taking his time and actually reading the assigned books for his classes. I told him I was glad he found something that worked for him, and we parted ways at the checkout line. Seeing him relaxed and genuinely interested in his education made me think that maybe some good came from the confession crisis after all. The 1-year anniversary of the confession chaos passed on a Tuesday in late January. I didn't think much about the date until I checked my mailbox after school and found a large envelope addressed to me. Inside was a group card signed by Shelby, Brad, Pete, Aria, and several other students from that class. Their message thanked me for holding them accountable when everyone else looked away. They acknowledged that my methods were flawed and my bluff was wrong, but they appreciated that someone finally enforced consequences instead of ignoring their violations. Shelby wrote a note saying she would have kept cheating forever if I hadn't accidentally exposed her. Brad wrote that getting caught freed him from Connor's exploitation. Pete wrote that his gambling operation would have gotten him in worse trouble eventually. Reading their words made me cry in my empty classroom. I'd spent a year feeling guilty about my role in destroying their lives, and here they were thanking me for it. Their forgiveness didn't erase my mistakes, but it helped me accept that growth comes from facing consequences honestly. I kept the card in my desk drawer and looked at it whenever I doubted my decision to stay in teaching. Rodriguez stopped by my classroom one afternoon in February with his mop bucket and cleaning supplies. We'd developed an unexpected friendship over the past year, meeting for coffee occasionally and talking about our experiences from the confession day. He taught me about generational slang differences, explaining how words like hot and cool meant completely different things to different age groups. I helped him understand modern teenage communication and social media language. His bathroom graffiti incident had become a running joke between us about the dangers of cultural miscommunication. He'd bring up examples of slang confusion he encountered, and I'd explain what the phrases actually meant to teenagers. Our friendship was weird and unexpected, but it helped both of us process the absurd crisis we'd accidentally created together. He told me his marriage was still going strong thanks to the advice he'd gotten from the substitute teacher, and he remained grateful for that conversation. I was glad something good came from his innocent compliment, even if it triggered complete chaos in my classroom. The district held a recognition ceremony in March honoring teachers who showed improvement in classroom management and student outcomes. I was surprised when my name was called and I had to walk up to accept a certificate. The superintendent praised my work with at-risk students and my improved disciplinary techniques. After the ceremony, Hayes pulled me aside in the hallway. He told me privately that I'd become a better teacher by learning from my mistake. Our working relationship had been strained for months after the confession crisis, but it was slowly rebuilding. He said he trusted my judgment again and appreciated how I handled difficult situations now. His words meant more to me than the district certificate, and I thanked him for giving me a second chance. The recognition felt like professional rehabilitation after everything that happened. I wasn't the teacher who destroyed students' lives anymore. I was the teacher who learned from her mistakes and improved. 2 years after the confession chaos, I was teaching a new honors class on a Wednesday morning when I noticed something written on a desk. A student had carved inappropriate words into the wooden surface with a pen. I calmly took a photo of the vandalism and sent it to the office through the proper reporting channels. I didn't threaten anyone or make dramatic announcements. I just documented it and moved on with my lesson. My students noticed my measured response, and one girl in the back row raised her hand. She asked if I was the teacher from that legendary confession story that everyone still talked about. I smiled and said yes, I was that teacher. She asked what I would have done differently, and I explained that I learned better methods since then. Growth comes from facing consequences honestly, which is exactly what I teach them every day. The class nodded and we returned to discussing the assigned reading. Nobody confessed to the desk vandalism, and I didn't expect them to. I'd learned that proper channels and transparent discipline work better than bluffs and manipulation. My classroom ran smoothly now, and I slept well at night knowing I handled situations the right way.